Good morning.
How are you, Elia? I hope all good. We are ready for this event.
Doing great. Yes. All ready.
All good. How many attendants we have?
It's about 30, I believe. Yeah.
People are joining.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Hassan.
Hi.
Do we have Yusuf with us?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Yusuf. Do you have a webcam?
Good morning.
Unfortunately not.
All right.
Well,
He's already behaving like a hacker. All right. Do you want to wait a few minutes more before you go?
Yeah, I see the people joining now. We have 54.
Oh, perfect.
55.
So is Mariam in control? Slides, agenda?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Confirmed. Mohammed al-Mufti here. I don't see his name.
Hello, Mohammed.
How are you?
Your mic is not.
Hacker, huh, Mohammed?
No, sir. Nothing of that kind.
All right, guys. So, Ilya, do you think we should start or we should wait 2 more minutes till 11:05?
People still joining. I see that we have more than 40 attendees already.
That's good.
So let's start, at 11:05, I believe.
Perfect.
I just want to make sure, is the mic clear for you guys to hear?
It's a little
Not
bit
very clear.
low. Yeah.
Oh, we have a dangerous guy in the lobby, guys. We have Qusay Haddad. Welcome, Qusay. I can see your message. I don't know, guys, if you know Qusay. Qusay is one of the best talented ethical hacker in Ukraine. He's won many awards. He's a nice guy. Welcome, Qusay. Be careful, guys. Whatever you will say, Qusay can defend.
We gotta watch our mouth, man. Is it clear now? Can you hear me? Or not? That's clear.
Ahmed, your mic is a little bit low.
Yeah, not clear at all.
All good. Ilya, I think we can start now.
Yeah.
To avoid delaying any agenda item. So, good morning, all. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the 8th version of NGN Majlis. Thank you all for joining us. I hope this session will add value to you as well as to us as a subject matter expert in the field. I don't want to pretend or to say that I'm a hacker. I'm not a hacker. I know the basic knowledge. I know how to manage things, but I'm not a hacker myself. I have better people here in the room with me. I will be moderating this session, inshallah, for all of you guys. Mariam, if you can open the first agenda item, the slide. Thank you, Mariam. So before I can go through any agenda item or start the actual subject, I need to say something important, a disclaimer. Whatever we discuss, whatever we say today, it's only used for educational purposes. We are not intending any harm. We don't want you guys to learn things to harm others. The only purpose for this knowledge is to protect our organizations, is to defend our company, and to learn how to add proper security control and proper security layers in place to make sure that no attacker or no threat actor or threat vector can take advantage of my weaknesses, my vulnerabilities, and eventually compromise my company and cause damage. So I hope this is clear. Now I can start. I'll start with a basic introduction, why we are here today. Ethical hacking, I believe it's known for all the attendees. What's the definition of ethical hacking? It's the opposite of hacking. We as information security experts and subject matter experts, we prefer to test our system before we let someone stranger test our system and find the weaknesses. So the idea here is to find your own weaknesses before someone else's do. This is to keep it in a nutshell, the basic definition. Find your own weaknesses before someone else's do, because eventually you will find weaknesses. No one is immune to vulnerabilities. No one is having perfect network setup. No one is having all the security controls in the world. We all have weaknesses, even if we have a limited budget and a limited set of devices and controls. In the end, weaknesses happen due to the human factor, due to the lack of proper knowledge and lack of awareness. If we have the most expensive system in the world, but we don't configure it properly, then still we have a vulnerability, we have a weakness. And this is the core subject we are trying to cover here. So I will start with something basic. I will ask, what is ethical hacking? And the first question will go to my colleague, Hassan. Please, in a nutshell, explain ethical hacking. 2 minutes.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Hassan. I work with BNH as the Information Security and the Data Protection Officer. So on to Hassan's question regarding what is exactly ethical hacking. It's when you break something, but for a good reason. So ethical hacking is about finding something that your IT team really wants to validate the controls of, and then basically testing those controls to ensure that they're working properly and reporting these findings accordingly. Ethical hacking can also be done outside the organization. When it's done outside the organization, there is typically a reporting process that each organization subscribes to in a framework. So for instance, you would disclose the finding that you have against that infrastructure to that organization. And if they don't do anything for 1 or 2 months, then according to the framework that they follow, you have a responsible disclosure process to follow. Is there a voice? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Noted.
Yeah.
Hassan. Thank you very much, Hassan.
Yeah.
Now,
So,
I will take the same question and direct it to Yusuf. Then we'll take Muhammad al-Mufti's opinion on both definitions. So Yusuf, you explain your own understanding of ethical hacking. And the reason I'm doing this is to make the picture clear to all the attendees why we are doing ethical hacking and what is ethical hacking then. Yes, Yusuf, please go ahead.
So exactly like how Hassan explained it, ethical hacking is about finding a vulnerability or anything that can be abused by a malicious party and reporting it in a very ethical way. So it cannot be disclosed to the public. It's only mentioned and shared with the organization, along with proper ways of the recommendation how to address these findings, the best control supply, or how to basically address this vulnerability. So it's all done ethically. It's something that's agreed on between the vendor and the organization. The scope has been defined. There's no going right or left. It's all within the scope of the project.
Thank you, Yusuf. Ilya, do you think ethical hacking is a mandatory control? Do we need it?
Yeah, for sure. Just to add here, what is the ethical hacking from my perspective is it's more like a proactive or preventive measure for the organization to, make sure that their perimeter or their systems are, let's say, not vulnerable to any potential threat from the outside. So definitely, yes, it is the must, to have.
Muhammad, do I need to do ethical hacking using third party, or should I do it myself? Go ahead.
You should, I think, do it yourself depending on the resources you have. Since it's ethically, you shouldn't involve any third party because it's information disclosure at the end of the day. And I must agree with Hassan and Yusuf what they say, and I would like to elaborate a little bit that ethical hacking involves unauthorized attempts to gain unauthorized access to a computer application or data. But you are not allowed to expose any of that data online or take advantage of a system that is vulnerable. Our only job here is to actually report the vulnerabilities for the client for remediation. Now, that's why it's called ethical, isn't it? So,
Perfect.
yeah.
Muhammad, first of all, thank you. Can you increase the mic volume or mic
I
setting?
tried to increase it. Okay, hold on. Stay with me.
And increase the decibel setting in your mic configuration. Thank you for your answer. I will go back to Hassan here before I come back to Muhammad. Hassan, Muhammad said we should do it internally, then we report it in an ethical way. Now the question, if I don't have the expertise in-house, does that mean I don't need this service, or still I need it?
So I'll speak about this from the perspective of Central Bank of Bahrain shortly. So Central Bank of Bahrain specifically mentions that you have to hire a third party to do this assessment for you. And the reason why that's the case, it's because you need somebody who does not have bias to hide the findings or to misrepresent the findings that they discovered during this process. So coming back to your question, if you don't have resources internally, doesn't mean that you don't need this. Actually, on the contrary, if you don't have resources doing this for you internally throughout the year, it means you definitely need somebody to be doing this for you. So it's actually a very important item. And if you don't have resources internally, it just means that it's probably more important for you as a CBB licensee.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Hassan. Now, to go back to Yusuf, what do you think about this? We have a very nice question from our brother Qusay here in the lobby. He's saying, what is the difference between ethical hacking, bug hunting, pen testing? Can you explain these terms before we go to the phases?
Sure thing. So I'll just quickly explain the difference between a vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, as well as bug hunting. So a vulnerability assessment, it's an activity where you try to identify a system weakness or something that can be abused by an attacker, and you report that directly. There's no exploiting it. Now, the key difference here between a vulnerability assessment and penetration testing is that in a penetration testing activity, you exploit the vulnerabilities that you identify to have a proof of concept. This activity is not performed in a vulnerability assessment. So you might require a different set of expertise to perform a penetration testing that you wouldn't require for a vulnerability assessment. A VA can be performed by an automated tool, for example, but for PT, you will require an extra set of hands to actually penetrate and exploit.
So basically, you mean it's the next phase of the ethical hacking process. It's actually taking advantage of the vulnerability that you have found to make sure that you can exploit it and provide evidences and proof of your concept to your management or to the client. Correct?
Exactly. The findings are exploited as a proof of concept, and you try to gain access to the system that you found vulnerable in the vulnerability discovery phase.
Ilya, what is the meaning of bug hunting or bug finding? It's different terminologies. But bug bounty or bounty hunters, explain this.
Yeah, so this is the, I would say, specific, let's say, exercise when the companies, they are actually reward the ethical hackers or, let's say, security, let's say, assessors, I would say, to to find any let's say potential vulnerabilities, because sometimes to boost the motivation, some big companies, they are actually start such programs, such activities, and as we can see from the news, from other sources, it's like a quite effective way to find let's say some vulnerabilities which is previously were actually not expected or not identified before.
Very nice answer. I have also one comment from my side. Now, let's think of cost-benefit analysis. If I am running a company, which approach is cheaper for me? I can go with first approach with hiring ethical hacking team or pen testers or red teaming approach, and I need to pay them to find vulnerabilities and take advantage of these vulnerabilities to try to exploit them, provide me with proof of concept and evidences. Or I can run a program, bug bounty program, and leave the floor open to anyone worldwide to find vulnerabilities and weaknesses in my system. And in this case, I'm not only running one vendor, I'm running the whole world. Everyone, all type of pen testers, all expertise around the globe are now participating in this engagement. And whoever comes first and report a vulnerability, I will reward him. And it still is cheaper for me compared to the contract that I will sign with a security company or a service provider. What do you think, Ilya? Is this a good answer?
Yeah, definitely. It will, let's say, require much more accurate, I would say, organization of such activity from your side as the company. But definitely, in terms of the value for the client, it's much more higher. I agree totally.
Now, a question. I see a question in the chat. Isn't the first option safer? Not necessarily. Okay, this is a very important question. Well, in some cases, if you are dealing with the wrong vendor, with the wrong ethical hacker, he could be unethical. So he can take advantage of the data or the finding he's getting, the weaknesses he found in your company, in your infrastructure, and blackmail you or maybe sell them in the dark web. So this is a problem. You need to take proper precautions, due diligence, sign proper NDAs, sign proper clauses in the contract before you assign this task to any pen testers. And I believe recently in this market, we have NGN joined the force of companies providing this service, plus providing managed security service agreements to companies who are willing to take their services. So if anyone here interested, he can contact Ilya later to ask for these services. Now, I'll go back to Muhammad. Muhammad, before I go to the second agenda item, I need you to explain in 2 minutes what are the phases of ethical hacking.
First of all, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, now it's much better.
Yeah,
much
thank
better.
God. So basically, phases of ethical hacking consist of primarily 5, and that's how we deal with stuff. So basically, Recon is like 70% of your job, if I might be accurate. So Recon involves you taking information or finding information publicly available. I'm not going to go deep into Recon because there's active and passive, so I'm just going to keep it on the top layer. So first phase was going to be Recon, which you gather info about the client because we're doing everything ethically here. Second phase would be like enumeration. Third phase will be like privilege escalation. Fourth phase would be like clearing tracks. And fifth phase is me forgetting that. So basically, yeah, Recon, enumeration, privilege escalation, and clearing tracks because you don't want to keep tracks on the system, basically, for others to find out what you're doing.
Thank you, Muhammad. Now, to explain everything you said in English, Hassan, please. All these phases in English. All right. So we can't assume that everyone attending here will understand these terminologies. So to add more value to this and add more spices to this Mil, Hassan, explain what is the definition of recon. What do you mean? What do you mean recon?
Okay, so as Muhammad said, there is passive and active recon. So to speak about recon briefly, recon is, imagine that you have binoculars and you're looking at something from really far, and you find out that that building looks bluish from far away. It has a lot of glass windows. It has a patio. So identifying those traits that can be associated with that building or that infrastructure is essentially the reconnaissance phase. And it's always indicated with binoculars.
Right?
Information gathering.
Information gathering.
Information
This is
gathering.
the English
That's
translation.
what he wanted us to say, basically. But there you go. He said it.
Forgive us, guys. Technical people, it's very hard for them to speak human language. They speak alien language.
Thanks for the compliment.
Bear with us. We speak alien language. So basically, it's the information gathering phase. We gather information about the victim, potential victim, or about the company, or about the system that you are going to scan, to try to penetrate, try to exploit. Before we jump into the penetration testing phase, we need to collect information about the system, whether it's a published system, whether it's an internal system, where this system resides. Is it hosted on-prem? Is it hosted in the cloud? Those are some of the information that we are going to gather. What services are running? What IPs are facing the world, published on the internet? What ports are open? So this is some of the information gathering phase. What was the second phase, Mohammed?
Basically, the second phase in enumeration.
Enumeration.
Yeah. So I can try
Yusuf.
to explain it in English. Yusuf, please explain it in English. No, it's all right.
Yusuf, enumeration. Muhammad, you listed all the phases. Now I'm taking advantage of all that.
Yes.
I don't want anyone to go to sleep. So Yusuf, explain enumeration in English.
So enumeration. Let me just take a step back. I'd like to explain something in English the way you're saying it. So for the reconnaissance phase, think of it the way we're seeing you right now, Hassan. The suit you're wearing, the necktie, the shirt, the undershirt, your watch, everything that you have on you. This is a reconnaissance phase. This is what the penetration tester or the tester in general is trying to do. He's trying to identify everything that is linked to you, all of your assets, everything that is on you, everything that is part of the scope of the project. He's trying to identify that. Your suit, your tie, your shirt, everything. These are all your assets, and this is what he's trying to find. Now, after that comes the phase of the vulnerability detection, or if you want to call it enumeration. You try to identify even more assets that can be abused, that can be exploited. So here for example, let's say we identified a system during the reconnaissance phase. In the vulnerability detection phase, we try to identify the signatures of the system, the version that is being used, to identify if it's vulnerable to any known vulnerabilities online or something like that. So everything that has been identified in the first phase. In the second phase, we try to poke holes into them and find issues with them.
That's
depending if they're outdated, the version of the service has been running, public available exploits, and so on.
So, Muhammad, what was the third phase?
Gaining access, basically.
Gaining access, perfect. So, Ilya, let's assume we have completed the reconnaissance. We have done the enumeration phase. Now we are trying to take advantage of all this information. We are trying to gain access. Can you explain what is the definition of gaining access? What do we mean here? Without actually mentioning the system type or the approach used. Just in general.
Actually, yeah, in general, it's just execution of the, or let's say, applying all the information that we collect from the reconnaissance and enumeration phases, just to, let's say, try to get the access to the exact system. So, in the nutshell, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Ilya. Muhammad, if I want to run through all the phases, can I do them all at once, or do I need time to run each phase alone?
Look, if you're gonna do them all at once, it's gonna be a mess. Simple as it is. That's why when we actually do a pen test or ethical hacking per se, we need mandates for each one of them, because again, as I mentioned previously at the beginning of this, Recon is like 60% of the job, that because it will actually evaluate or tell you, oh hey dude, you guys have something here, or there's something here, and then you can move to the other step to identify what is this thing, or is this thing outdated, or does it need an update, is there something about it, you know. But yes, running them all together is going to be a total mess, because it's just not going to work. You know. So
That's a good answer. Very political, from a political guy.
yeah,
So
thanks.
meaning all of them, you sound like a salesman. So
I'm trying, actually. I'm working on
that's good.
that.
That's
Yeah.
good. So yes, I agree with you. We can't just go and jump into this pool of information. We need to take our time, keeping in mind that in many cases, and this is a very important comment I will give you guys. No one mentioned this. When we do ethical hacking, most of the time, we do not inform everyone in the company. So let's assume I'm the CISO for the bank. I'm hiring a third-party consultant or a vendor, cybersecurity vendor like NGN, asking them to provide some services, some vulnerability assessment, some penetration testing services. Let's call it ethical hacking again. Now, in this scenario, I don't need to go and inform everyone in the company. Why? Because I'm trying to test all the other layers that I have in place, and including my security monitoring team, if I have one, depending on the company size. So whatever I'm trying to say here, it's uh, assuming that we are running in a large organization, mid-sized to large organization, and we have all the required security layers, like all banks do. So I'm testing my security control, my security monitoring controls. I want to see if they can detect such an attempt to scam my system or to find information. I'm also testing if I have proper controls to detect someone who is trying to enumerate my systems, find open ports, find open IPs, find information about the services running on my infrastructure, on my systems. So, Ilya, a question to you: as a security service provider, if I approach you and ask for ethical hacking services, what are the questions that you are going to ask me as a company? Let's assume I'm a bank. I want you to provide this service to me. What would you ask me?
Yeah, first of all, actually, we need to understand the scope of the exercise. So we have, as we discussed previously, we have multiple, I would say, areas that could be assessed. It's the internal infrastructure, external environment of the company. So this is we have several questions to clarify the scopes on the both, let's say, areas. So, but usually it's number of IPs, number of systems, which is going to be tested. If you as the bank have a mobile application, we will also ask you about information related to that, like what is the number of API methods, for example, you're using to communicate with other, let's say, systems, which is also should be assessed during the this exercise. So yeah, actually we have like up to 10, I would say, questions, which has been asked to the client to understand the size of the project, of the exercise.
So we can call this a prerequisite checklist.
True.
Prerequisite checklist. Okay. Now, I have something in mind. Let's assume I hired a company to perform ethical hacking. How do I ensure to my management that this engagement is successful or not successful? What I'm expecting? What are the expectations? Hassan.
Okay, so there has to be an objective. Typically, if it's a red team exercise, that's pretty easy to set because you simply put a red flag somewhere within the infrastructure and you'd ask the attackers to try and grab that flag. But if it's a general penetration testing exercise, the criteria of success is going to vary from organization to organization. So sometimes senior management care about the compliance checkbox. So if it's a compliance checkbox, and then the requirement is pretty low. But it really depends on what the organization is trying to achieve through this, and setting that in stone and making sure that that objective remains the same before and after the exercise.
So we all agree now that ethical hacking is important. There's no doubt. We know it is a mandatory phase, a mandatory control. Some of the best controls to be used to ensure proper configuration, proper setup of my IT infrastructure. Before I jump to the next agenda item, I will ask Yusuf the following question. What type of organization or industry requires ethical hacking? Yusuf, are you with us?
So, in my opinion,
Yes.
all organizations need this, especially organizations that deal with, for example, in financial institutes. It also depends on the regulator. Depending on your line of work, your line of business, there are regulators that have requirements for you to conduct these kind of activities. So it's really a compliance versus security. This is something that I'll be covering later. From a security perspective, everyone should be conducting these activities because, as you mentioned previously, everyone is vulnerable to some degree. You can have as many compensating controls, can have as many preventive controls, but at some point you will be vulnerable. So that's for the security perspective. Compliance, you are still required by a regulator to perform these. So in my opinion, everyone needs to be doing these kind of activities.
And
So-
hey, I think it's important because it's data, right? At the end of the day, it's humans' data. So if you're not protecting it, how am I supposed to put my trust in a bank or in an institute that's covering my data and personal information, So
Yeah, but in this case, Mohammed, you are not revealing or publishing the ethical hacking or, let's say, pen testing reports to the public, so customers will not know. But in this case, we have, as Yusuf said, we have a regulator. They are checking. They are making sure that all banks or financial institutions are properly configured, properly protected. Data is protected and in a well shape and sound. Before I end this discussion, I'll ask Ilya the important question. What types or how many types of ethical hacking we have? How many flavors of ethical hacking we have?
Types, you mean, what exactly you mean?
All right, perfect. So when I approach a vendor and I say I want ethical hacking, is it like just an open-ended question, like general? I have someone who is providing some, like giving some cheat sheet for us. Qusay is helping already.
yeah, it's a
Ah,
cheat
you
sheet
mean-
actually.
So
I got
Qusay,
it. I got it. Sorry for that. So yeah, definitely there is three main types. Usually, again, coming from the regulator point of view, it's required for the black box, we called it, and the gray box. So the definition here is the let's say amount of information that we have. So in the black box, we are actually mimicking the normal user, or I would say the threat actor, which have no information or have only the public information, which is related to the organization. So in the gray box, we have, let's say, to test the scenarios when we are acting as the normal user. So usually it's done for the internal assessment. Okay. And the third one is the white box, where we are acting as the admin or privileged user. So where we have the access to the, let's say, most of the systems and actually trying to find the vulnerabilities from that perspective.
well said. Thank you, Ilya. So the reason I put this question last, or I asked this question at the end of this panel discussion, is to assure everyone here who is listening to us, the attendees, that it's not one approach. It depending on your requirement. It depends on your industry. It depends on the regulatory requirements. So in some cases, you will go with the white hat. Some other cases, you will go with the gray hat. Some other cases will go with black hat. black hat, meaning someone is testing my system or my infrastructure from the outside without any information sharing from my side. He's not contacted by me, or he could be contacted by me, but I did not provide him with any information. The gray box is something in between. I'll provide some sort of data or information to him, some kind of access, but I'll still expect him to find more vulnerabilities, more weaknesses in my infrastructure. And lastly is the white hat, where I go and provide full access to the tester, give him create an account for him, give him a VPN access if he's working remotely, or give him direct access to my infrastructure, tell him go play around, find all the weaknesses you can find in my system. So usually if I'm developing a system, if I'm developing a new application, in the beginning of the development phase, before I go live, before I publish my solution, I will utilize the white hat services. The white hat services. Then, if I am in the UAT phase, or I have my system running in an emulation environment or a simulation scenario, running in a UAT environment, UAT means user acceptance testing. It's like a test phase, beta testing. I can go with the flavor gray box to try to find some weaknesses in the APIs, some weaknesses in the ports and the services running, try to bypass authentication or bypass some controls that are set or put in place. And lastly, when I publish the system and I go live, for example, banks have online banking websites or applications, CBB expect us to go and scan those systems and provide them with a report. This is the black box. From the outside, I will come to NGN and say, Ilya, please scan my application, test my website, make sure it's not vulnerable, and if you find any weakness, report it as ASAP so I can go and fix it. And I will take this report and submit it to the central bank. This is in the scenario of banking, financial systems, and the banking sector. It's just an example for you guys because I'm linking the actual work with an objective, with a requirement, why we are doing what we are doing. That's really this really sums up the definition of ethical hacking and the phases that goes through with this task and the different flavors of ethical hacking. Thank you all for your answers, and thank you, Qusay, for contributing to this rich discussion. I expect more people to ask questions, give comments. This is in the end, this is for you guys. We are trying to add value here in the community and increase the level of knowledge and awareness in the industry. I will jump to the second important section in our agenda or our session today, our event. The most important component in my infrastructure to be tested. Hassan, this question is to you. Which component in the infrastructure have the most critical value in current modern organizations?
Okay, so typically my perspective on infrastructure is divided into three things: the technology that's being used, the processes that are employed for these technologies, and then the people. And from my perspective, people are always the most critical item within your organization to start and protect or start and secure. People are the front end of your organization, and that's what the attacker is going to try and target first. From a technology perspective, if we're looking at people, it typically means Active Directory or whatever identity management solution that you have in place.
Correct. That's really true. So Active Directory, you said Active Directory, it's one of the most important controls or components in the organization to be tested. Now, the question is now directed to Yusuf. Can you define or can you explain what is Active Directory and why do we need it? Simple definition. Don't go into the technical details of it.
Directory is something that was developed by Microsoft. It's used for...
What is Active Directory? Why do we need Active Directory?
Sure. So Active Directory stores actually the information of your internal network, the users, the groups, the domains that are in your organization. It's important to have these to have the internal structure of your network.
Perfect. Ilya, what else you can add to Yusuf's answer?
Just to add in general that I believe that Active Directory is the most important asset for the organization in terms of the identity management and in terms of protection. We need to say keep an eye all the time on this type of systems.
So if I compromise the Active Directory, there is a great chance that I can compromise other systems in the infrastructure or in the organization. Correct me, Hassan, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's very true. Typically AD objects or items within your infrastructure which have a relationship to Active Directory typically have a high value associated to them, and they typically have high level of permissions towards web applications, programs, and other things that are running within your infrastructure.
Very good. So now what I will do, I want you guys, Hassan and Muhammad, to go and explain to me and to the people here how to attack Active Directory. I know nothing about Active Directory. I don't know how to attack it. Okay, you are saying it's important component, and if I get access to it, I will be able to access other systems. So how can I do that? Give me examples. Explain it. The floor is open to you guys. You have 15 minutes to do that.
You're on mute, Muhammad.
Muhammad, unmute yourself.
He said he can.
I actually couldn't. There was a presenter.
This is a very nice sign language, Muhammad.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I'm not talking. I'm gonna talk. You know.
I have never seen this. It means attack Active Directory.
Yeah, Hassan, you can start, or I can start, or whatever. But again, it goes back to the phases of ethical hacking, because we need to actually do recon again, no matter what you're hacking, web app or mobile app or Active Directory. Nonetheless, recon is a really important tool here, because you need to research about maybe there are some flows made by a human, like, hey, there's a password somewhere here, or hey, there's a policy that is somewhere here. You know. You can go with the next step if you want, so I can have space for you to talk.
So I'll start with you, Hassan.
Yeah.
Please. Start planning the attacking phase of Active Directory.
Okay, so it's very important to understand first that Active Directory within itself is not what we are going after here. We're going after objects which the Active Directory bestows access upon. So what we're actually going after is other items within the organization or other items within the infrastructure, which Active Directory actually gives or permits additional levels of access. So once we have that idea in mind and that picture in mind, we start looking for something called attack vectors. And what we mean by attack vectors is essentially pathways or roads or essentially tracks that we need to follow to reach our end goal, or own that object that we're trying to go after, or perhaps have higher level of access within the Active Directory.
And this is the recon phase.
So within the recon phase, whether it's passive or active recon, which we can give examples on later on. So an example of a passive recon would be something like Shodan. I'm pretty sure most of you guys have heard of Shodan. And there is also another tool that I really like. It's called Census. So we'll have a look at those as well. They're both relatively free. There is a paid version of each, but they're, to a certain extent, they're both free. And you can use those tools to see if anything within your organization is exposed outside, actually. So maybe I'll show you guys what that looks like later on. So identifying those items from the reconnaissance phase.
Sorry for interruption, Hassan. Jose is saying he can't hear you. I'm not sure if someone else can confirm the same issue. Do we have the same problem with others?
For me, I can hear him properly.
I can hear him. Jose, can you try to log out and log in again, Jose, if possible? Maybe this will solve the issue for you. Okay. Yes, Hassan, sorry, proceed.
So using the recon phase, that's where we will find possible attack vectors through passive and active reconnaissance. And active reconnaissance is something that we did not touch on.
Exactly.
Something like Nmap. which we will have an example on later on during the slides. So essentially what Nmap does is it captures what is running on your infrastructure. So every company has a set of IP addresses that they've purchased from their internet service provider. That would be Bettelco, Viva, or STC within Bahrain. And essentially, the company deploys its infrastructure on those IP addresses from an external standpoint. And when somebody is conducting active reconnaissance on that infrastructure, they're essentially trying to detect the technologies that are running on the infrastructure. So we've touched before on people, process, and technology. So the recon phase tries to identify technology and people at the same time. This is why your internal information security training frequently tells you don't post a lot of personal information publicly, because that's part of the reconnaissance phase that attackers actually do. So that's the first part of it, trying to identify possible attack vectors. Part of reconnaissance is also scanning, even though we highlight this as a separate phase. We move on to scanning, and when we talk about scanning, we essentially talk about the network itself. So that's the IP addresses, the ports that are running on these IP addresses, and then finally services, and then finally running some vulnerability scans. So whether it's commercial tools such as Nessus, which is a really popular scanning tool, or whether it's a manual scan using Nmap and then using a certain script to detect a vulnerability. That's the second type.
These days I'm kind of using OpenVAS because I'm broke, so I'm going OpenVAS. So it's free for Kali. There you go. So
so what Mohammed mentioned is actually really important. Kali Linux is the operating system, so that's the Windows essentially version, Windows for hackers essentially, that we really like to use. So
that's another discussion, because a Linux is just a Linux, but any Linux can be Kali as well. But that's
actually for people who like Windows but want to use ethical hacking tools, you can look up something called Commando VM. Commando VM is essentially Kali Linux but with a Windows flavor. So Commando VM, that's if you're interested in this, but you want to go the Windows route, you don't really like Linux, but you still want to have the same level of tools, you want to go after Commando VM.
By the way, Microsoft implemented the store now. There's Kali Linux.
Question for you. You are in the reconnaissance phase. Regardless of the system, regardless of the tool that you're going to use, do you need credentials to do this?
No. Again, as we mentioned, if it is passive or active, because later on when you guys provide credentials, we can also do recon on users, or basically enumeration on users. But again, to touch on the topic of Kali Linux, I'm not advertising Microsoft. I hate Microsoft with all due respect, but there's actually Kali Linux now in Microsoft Store, or Ubuntu, or Linux Mint. You guys can just download it directly. That's another topic, but just to touch upon it,
definitely. That's the Linux subsystem that you can.
WSL.
The tools used in ethical hacking, I think they are, let's say, outside the scope of our discussion. It's up to the person learning ethical hacking techniques, and he wants to perform a specific task or achieve a specific objectives. I believe for each task or objectives, he can use a different tool.
There are a gazillion of tools, you can choose your own flavor at the end of the day.
Exactly. So I don't want it to look like we are fixing this in one scenario, that there is only one approach. No, there are countless number of approaches. So this being said, we continue the discussion.
Okay. So you identify these attack vectors during your reconnaissance and your scanning phase of the infrastructure. And once you've identified your attack vectors, you would essentially put them in a list. So documenting the process that you've done so far.
That's the most important part.
Documenting what you've done in reconnaissance and scanning, and listing those findings up, and then ordering them on priority level is very important, especially during ethical hacking engagements, because you're constrained to a limited time, and you can't really spend a lot of time going through each and every single finding. What you will have to do is you'll have to prioritize these findings, and that's something that you'll learn with time. The more that you try to exploit things,
you will start to learn how to take priority to these exploits.
100%.
So once you've identified these attack vectors, you've listed them in your notepad, you've prioritized them based on likelihood of exploitation. And that's something that you'll need to do again later on when you're trying to escalate your privileges. So you've identified your attack vectors, you've chosen an attack vector, and that attack vector has successfully gotten you into the machine or into a machine within the infrastructure. Once you do that, it is not a guarantee that you've compromised a meaning or a user account that has proper permissions.
Probably you're the lowest.
Yeah. So you might have, if the service is being configured relatively properly, then you'll probably get normal user on Windows or a www-data user on Linux. So those are the lowest level authority user accounts within each of these platforms. So you find out what your current access level is by doing whoami /priv on Windows or ID on Linux, and you start to identify, okay, where do I stand right now in the hierarchy of things? There is Active Directory or root user on the very top, and this is where I am right now. And you
Can
try
you show
to
me examples, Hassan? Can you show the audience here examples of what you are saying? What type of outputs we are looking at? What we are doing?
So can I share my screen? I don't think I have a presenter role yet.
Mariam, can you please allow screen sharing for Hassan?
So I'll move my screens a little bit, so the camera will be on my right side, but I'll be looking towards the front in a bit. So I think, Mariam, you'll have to stop presenting so that I can present myself.
Yusuf, you are also welcome to participate in this discussion with any piece of information you have.
Yeah, feel free to jump in. Yeah. So we'll have a look at some of the examples that we've spoken about previously. So when we talked about active scanning, we were talking about something such as Nmap, and you can see that the first step was running Nmap in an active scanning demeanor. So that's trying to actively look for information. We added the SV command over here, which asks Nmap to identify the services that are running. We've specified -p, which allows us to specify the port that we want to specifically scan. So this is meaningful if you know exactly which port that the service is running on.
So those are flags used in
parameters.
Those are parameters and flags that you can configure and utilize using Nmap tool.
So what we see after the first scan is said that the host is actually down, and if it's really up, it's blocking our probes. And this is very popular if you're doing this in an operational technology environment. And what I mean by operational technology environment is outside the financial sector, within Bahrain, we have the industrial sector, which has companies such as Babco, Alba, GPIC, so companies within the oil and gas sector. Those companies have two different types of environments. They have an IT environment, and then they have an OT environment, which is the operational technology. If a system is running within the operational technology environment and it's connected to the internet, even a single ping can actually take that machine down. So it's very important to set up firewall rules properly within those types of environments to ensure that pings don't get through to those systems and take them down. Mainly because OT environments specifically are very sensitive, even to ICMP pings. So in this case,
ping Hassan means the ICMP protocol. Because there is no protocol called ping in the firewall. It's the ICMP.
ICMP. Okay. Yeah. So ICMP, or whether it's a TCP handshake that you can do to actually validate whether the host is actually up. That's another way of validating if the host is actually up, which is what we do here. We add the -pn flag to disable host discovery and simply double check if a port is open. We have identified an open port, and this is where we are. So this is what the Recon phase actually looks like. We've identified an IP address, we've identified a port, and we've scanned those 4 services running onto them.
So we have a very useful script shared by our brother here, Qusay, and he is, I think, he is really knowledgeable in what he's saying. So this script can be used to enumerate or try to recon an Active Directory environment, trying to find information. So this is also adding value to the discussion. Thank you, Qusay. And
So actually,
I'm
Qusay's
actually gonna
script,
save it now, and I'm gonna try to run it. Actually, I'm gonna take
Qusay's
it down.
script is actually really useful,
Yeah.
especially because it includes the min rate parameter. So the min rate parameter specifies how fast
it is.
the scan runs.
Yeah.
And for students, so for people who are learning ethical hacking, if you're doing any of the certifications and you're connected via VPN to the lab environment that you're trying to learn on, then the min rate parameter is actually really important, because in some cases, lab scans take a long time. So for students, I would really advise you to take that min rate parameter into consideration.
Hassan, I have a quick question. So let's say I don't have any experience with the command line, and I would still like to use some kind of scanning tool. Are there any other recommendations aside from the scan Nmap?
Okay. You could rely on public available tools that are on the internet. You simply specify the IP address, but that will not be useful for you if you're trying to scan internal infrastructure.
There's a GUI, if you don't mind me sharing, there's a GUI of Nmap called Zenmap, if you guys want to check it out, which is much more simplified version of Nmap. It's a GUI version, since you don't want to deal with CLI command lines always, you know?
Yeah. And I think I have also one more comment. In some cases, you can utilize PowerShell, I think. Qusay, you can correct me if I'm wrong. PowerShell is also useful in this case. If you know the in and out of PowerShell, you can utilize it to run some of the enumeration or reconnaissance commands. Yeah. So Qusay, confirm PowerShell can be used without Nmap, using Nmap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we've done here is we've identified our target. So that's the IP address. We've identified the port that the service is running onto. And then we've set the flags that are relevant for us. And we've identified this web page that we have over here, which has a secure web browser search functionality. And the first thing that we do is we obviously try and see what does it do. We start poking it. So we put a test parameter in it, and we see what does it do. So because it's a secure web browser that primarily searches the web, or primarily searches for URLs, test did not actually yield us any result. But what it did indicate for us is the way that the application actually interacts with our parameters. So that you can see here, the search functionality resulted in a URL parameter in the address bar. And what that indicates for us is a potential local file injection, or possibly RCE for this application. The primary vulnerability that we're going to look at here is SSRF. So for SSRF, we want to sort and investigate how does this application interact if we actually specify a URL. So we start up a Python server on our Kali Linux, and we set it towards port 80. So that's where the web server is going to be running at. We use sudo to ensure that sufficient privileges are being granted to the HTTP server. So in recent versions of Kali Linux, you are no longer root by default, and you would have to escalate your privileges for performing certain tasks. So for people who are downloading Kali Linux as of recent, you'll notice that you can't really run all the tools without escalating your privileges locally. And that is very important, because that is done so that you don't actually break your operating system by running commands arbitrarily. So we start up our HTTP server on port 80, and we plug in the URL within the search box that we've seen previously on the web page. You can see that the URL or the address has been URL encoded. So if you are using a function such as curl in Kali Linux, instead of actually using the GUI of the web application itself, you will have to URL encode your requests for them to actually go through. But that's another tangent. So we've sorted up our HTTP server, and you can see when we searched for our HTTP server, for our Python server
sorry.
on top of it.
I'm sorry. For me as a beginner, why me starting a server is important here, if you don't mind answering this question, as a beginner perspective.
So you essentially want to see if the application can interact with things that you put up for it. So understanding how much access or how much control you have over the web application is really important. As a normal user, doing this allows you to understand the fact that you can pinpoint this web application towards things that you specify for it, including things that you are running within your own environment, within your own machine.
Okay, so I don't want to interrupt you guys. Just a reminder to all people here, disclaimer again, everything you see here, all scripts that are shared by us and by the experts are for educational purposes only. Do not run these scripts in your organization. Do not run them in your production environment. You are to be held accountable for what you are doing. I recommend you, if you want to test, create your own virtual environment, download VirtualBox or virtual machine, whatever tool you like, run Active Directory in a virtualized environment, try to hack it yourself, try to run these scripts on top of your systems in a virtualized secure environment. Do not use these scripts in your production environment.
So if you are a student who wants to test things like this, and you want a free resource, which is not very machine intensive, so you don't actually need to launch your own virtual machines, you can simply start them up on the web. I would highly recommend the Offensive Security Proving Grounds Play platform. So that's a free platform that you can try these things in, and it doesn't compromise anyone. This platform is made so that you can test tools and practice this type of exercises.
What about GNS3? Can we use the GNS3 services on the cloud? Also, you can also help us if you have other recommendation for people who want to learn.
So my recommendation is specifically Proving Grounds Play and Practice. They are a very good representation. I think Hack the Box is also a very good option that's available publicly on the web. Yeah, so yeah, Hack the Box,
because
definitely.
It's kind of OSCP level, so
yeah,
it's kind of high. Yeah.
So Hack the Box is definitely another recommended service that's out there.
Oh, perfect. So guys,
yes.
Save this chat. It's really useful for you. I recommend you to save the chat. We have many good information here in the chat. I'm personally learning also from you guys.
So
yes,
there's actually, I'm sorry, there's one which I would like to share. Actually, it's called Over the Wire, which I started with 5 years back, and it's actually really good because it takes you step by step. You know how to move files, how to do this, how to do that. So yeah, it's good for the beginning push of.
So I've actually used Over the Wire when I did not know Linux. So if you don't know Linux, and you want to learn Linux, I think Over the Wire is amazing for learning Linux.
It teaches you how to move files, SSH into something, different ports. I agree.
And it takes you one step at a time. So it doesn't overwhelm you with a big objective. If I remember correctly, the first step was actually simply just connecting to a machine.
Yeah, through an SSH, just go there. Exactly.
So that was the first step. So it's so if you want to learn Linux, I think Over the Wire, especially the bandit version of Over the Wire is really amazing. So I'm going to type that in chat as well.
Perfect. Hassan, for the sake of time, let's try to conclude the attacking approach and jump into the defensive side. So now you are explaining how to attack an Active Directory, how to enumerate, how to find information that could be used later. So how to defend.
Okay,
so during the discussion, during the attacking phase, we can speak about the defensive side also. You don't need to wait till the end.
So for the specific attack or the specific type of attack that we're talking about right now, which is SSRF, you can see that the application has interacted with our web server, which means that we can potentially put up payloads or things that we want the application to run on our web server and then have the web server run it. To stop those types of attacks, it's very important that you whitelist only things that or you have validated that the application should interact with. And what I mean by whitelist and not blacklisting or setting parameters for regular expressions is you want to tackle this in the same way that you tackle your firewall. You start off with deny any, and then you whitelist from there.
Hence never trust an user's input, basically.
Yeah. So you would start off with the same approach that you typically configure firewall with, deny any, and then you would simply whitelist the domains that you have within your organization that host the resources that the application actually utilizes. So that would be the first step. The second step would be to hide any raw responses. So raw responses are vulnerable for man-in-the-middle attacks, which we have an example of in the next slides. So you want to try to obfuscate any potential raw parameters that you could essentially be passing by. WAF is a good option, but WAF is just an illusion. To a certain extent, yes.
To a certain extent, yes.
But I think with the available options within the market and how cheap they are, things like Cloudflare, for example, there's a free subscription and then there is a $20 subscription, which I think is more than sufficient for the small to medium businesses within Bahrain. I think Cloudflare is an amazing choice. And it's extremely cheap. $20 is nothing per month for the functionality that it provides you with. Obviously, it does come with its drawbacks at $20. The IP address will not be exclusively yours, so looking up your information through that IP address will not be as easy. Enforced URL schemas, so there is no reason to allow the application to access FTP file or HTTP if you have it running on port 443 for HTTPS. So ensuring that the application only runs the parameters that it needs to be running is very important. The fourth one will be enabling authentication on all services. So when we talk about this, we specifically mention things like Memcache, Redis, and Mongo, which are service running on your infrastructure, which you might not be using. From an information security and cybersecurity perspective, what you want to do is you want to reduce your attack surface. And what we mean by reduction of attack surface is essentially turning off, disabling, or extremely locking down services that you don't actually use on an active basis within your environment. Sanitize and validate inputs. So a very basic example of that, if you have a phone number in the profile parameter in your website, there is no reason to accept characters in the phone number field. So validating input so that the inputted information is the same information that you're expecting, or the same format of information that you're expecting.
And this could be used also on a published website. It's the same. Whenever you're expecting information or an input, you should use data input validation.
Yes. So that's actually extremely important for your public-facing sites. If you are within the development team of your organization, you probably want to go back and look at the fields that you have within your public websites and ensure that the parameters that are being accepted within those fields are actually the same that you're wanting the user to submit. So you take the trust away from the user and you grant him only the permissions or the level of access that you need to grant him. So essentially, in this section, we move on to the exploitation of SSRF. So what we do is we conduct the same request, but before conducting that request, we use a tool called Responder.
That's a gift for mankind, basically.
So Responder is an amazing tool, but we will go over how easy it is to actually fix within your infrastructure. As much as it's really awesome for us attackers, it's actually very easy for you to fix this issue within your infrastructure. So you run Responder, and what Responder does is it interacts with the interface or the IP address that you've asked the web application to communicate with. So in this case, you can see that I use the I parameter within Responder, and then I specified tunnel 0 because I was connected to a VPN. So that's what this does, which means that
the network adapter.
Yeah. So that means that I want responder to essentially read requests that are being passed onto the onto this interface specifically, and not anything else. So this is very useful if you're running this within a lab environment or within a test environment within your organization, and you have two different adapters within your device. You would probably want to use the specific adapter that is connected to the test environment. So within Linux, you can use obviously ifconfig, and then you'll be able to see the different adapters that you have running. So we call the request. We tell the web application to communicate back to our device. But with responder running, and what you can see here is you can see the NTLM hash being passed over onto the request onto our attacker machine. So this is my machine at this point, and what I've gathered through responder is something called an NTLM hash. We won't go into details into what NTLM is, but a hash is basically a computation of a password. And typically, if you have a password and you hash it using a certain algorithm, you'll always get the same hash. So it's reversible in nature. So we have captured the hash by this very simple request. And what we can do from here is actually, okay, before we actually see what we can do with that, we will talk about, I got a bit excited there. We'll talk about what you can do to defend against this type of attack.
I can see that you just want to attack.
Yeah.
So keep going. I have no issues with that, though.
So obviously, responder is not only used with SSRF. Actually, within your organization, if you run responder and you don't have the defending mechanisms in place, responder can actually still capture hashes when users are accessing things like printers, when users are accessing things like shared drives or shared folders that you have within your organization. And the way that it works is, imagine if a user tries to search for a file within a file server, and the file server does not have that file. What the user machine is going to do is it's going to look at other servers within the infrastructure, and it's going to say, do you have this file? Do you have this file? And what responder does is it tells the client machine, so the user's machine, it tells it, I have this server, or I have this file. Why don't you try authenticating with me? And that's what has happened in this case. Because
I think Windows downside, basically, of authentication.
So we will see how you can stop that from happening. But that's actually because of legacy protocols, which are running on your Windows 10 21H2 so far by default.
Yeah, so by default,
Yeah, so if you want to look at these services that are running, let's see, defending against Elena and Bts attacks. So they're divided into two segments because there are two segments of controls that you will need to turn on within your infrastructure to defend from this. The first one will be to disable multicast name resolution, or turn off multicast name resolution. So you want to disable that. And we've highlighted here where you have to go within your infrastructure to do that. So if you want to screenshot that and you want to have a look at it later on within your infrastructure. And the second option that you will need to disable within your infrastructure is Netbios. So Netbios is a legacy protocol. It's not being used anymore actively within Windows 10 or Windows actually Vista and above. This is actually a protocol that was in place for Windows Server 2003 and Windows XP. However, all infrastructure, if you're deploying it with no hardening baseline, and we'll need to touch on hardening baselines in a bit, has this protocol running by default on the background. So you will need to actively go and turn Netbios off to disable responder from actually doing its job within your infrastructure. So if you want to protect against hash gathering using responder within your infrastructure, these are the two things that you'll need to go and do. You'll need to turn off multicast name resolution, and you'll need to disable Netbios. Both of these protocols are legacy protocols, and you would typically not want to use them within your infrastructure. However, it will be a good idea to try this within your test environment first, and then migrate the changes onto your GPO policy or your actually production environment within your organization. So NetBIOS and LLMNAR, disable both of these legacy protocols and you'll be okay.
You'll be actually surprised how many clients use it till this day after me testing. Like it's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Like,
So
people still use it.
So something to do if you have something like a managed SOC or essentially a SIEM solution that's running within your infrastructure, the Windows server has something called event logs. And what you want to do to ensure that disabling these services doesn't actually nuke your environment is you want to turn on these event logs, and you want to find the exact event logs which use NetBIOS and LLMNAR, and then see what actual services are running over these two protocols to identify if you can actually disable these safely or not. So event log and SIEM and managed SOCs can definitely help you with identifying if these are actually running with you.
So guys, what Hassan is saying here, it's a very important step that we all take in as an information security experts when we work in a bank or we work in a large organization, even a smaller size organization. As a security officer or a CISO, you need to come up with a system hardening checklist. We call it minimum security baselines. So what he's saying, you need to disable this port, disable this service, control this or control that. You need to define those in this document, and you need to ensure that IT follows and implement these controls defined in the document. So the idea here, we always have weaknesses, but we can create system hardening checklists. Now, you can use CIS, you can use other methodologies, you can contact your vendor to customize something that is suitable to your business, because in some cases I can't just go blindly and take all CIS benchmarks or best practices and just throw it on IT and expect them to implement it. In some cases, this could bring some services down. This could break my services. So it's very important to go analyze, check, fine-tune, customize these checklists, come up with something suitable to your organization only. And we call it minimum security baseline, system hardening. It could be used, or it could be called anything, up to you. In the end, this achieve the objective. So guys, we have spoken about the basic steps used in attacking Active Directory. And during the discussion, you are also explaining some of the methods that can be used to defend against attackers, to prevent attack from happening in the first place. So what do you think? Is this enough? Is there any other way around this?
It's never gonna be enough, but you just gotta have to make sure you follow the standards, I guess, in a sense. Because again, if we go back all the way to the beginning of this meeting or session, nothing is unhackable, in a sense, So we always gotta follow minimum requirements to make sure, at least, to make it really hard for hackers to get into a system. Yes, good ones will get in, but we just got to make sure that it's kind of not impossible, but at least impossible.
So it's a continuous process, continual risk assessment approach, continual risk treatment approach. And at some point, and this is very important to explain, at some point, you need to admit that you can't protect something or you can't prevent an attack. So you need to communicate some other methods to the board, to top management, to the CEO, including risk transfer or risk sharing, like putting in place or having in place cybersecurity insurance policy for the company in case you get compromised, putting in place some sort of security monitoring, assuming that you will be compromised, at least you can detect the compromise. So guys, we can never claim or say here that there is one magic solution that will prevent attackers from gaining access to your system. You could end up having a scenario where one of your system administrators attack your environment. So this is happening. So if one of my staff is gone rogue and is trying to take advantage of his privileges, this is a disaster for me. So what can I do in this case? I need to have proper monitoring controls in place, audit logs, log management, SOC team. This is another service that NGN provide. So guys, if it is expensive for you to go and set up your own SOC team or SIM, which is the security incident and event monitoring management solution in a place, you can always outsource this service. You can always sign a managed security service agreement with a third party. It could be NGN, it could be someone else. In my case, I recommend NGN in Bahrain. Why? Because your data is not leaving the country.
Yeah, that's what we do here. Yeah.
So this is covering two things. Not only providing you with a tool to monitor your domain controller admins and users and detect possible attacks on your systems, it will also adhere to the central bank requirements when it comes, if you are a bank, for example, when it comes to log management and log monitoring, and also adhere to the data privacy and data protection law, PDPL, because you are not sending any data outside Bahrain. So always look at the big picture, guys. How I speak with technical people, I always say this: why you are doing what you are doing. So I'm now top management, and you are coming to me showing me all of this alien language, attack, hash, NTLM. I don't know what.
Alien language.
Yes.
Alien language.
So why do I need all this nonsense? What are you saying? Go out. I will tell you. You are wasting my time. Is this bringing money to me? I'm making profit. What's happening?
So actually,
I need to know how to speak business language.
Yeah. So actually, this is a very important point, because for people who are learning this, it will be very tempting to actually do a VAPT and present it to senior management, but they wouldn't understand any of it. And the alternative information or the alternative content that I would recommend for senior management would be something like a maturity assessment, which highlights the terms in English language, and then shows you where do you currently stand, where do you want to go, and then the path that you need to take to reach higher level of maturity. So maturity assessment would definitely
let me explain something. If it is me speaking, I'm going now to a CEO or board or whoever, my manager, direct line manager, chief risk officer. I have a problem. I have weaknesses with my Active Directory. People can hack it. I can lose everything. All accounts, passwords could be compromised. They will find out all the hashes, all the passwords, all this nonsense, alien language. Then what?
I don't think,
this could impact the business. I need to speak business language. So guys, in the end, an ethical hacker should speak business language. Never rely on technical language only. Speak business language as well as technical language. When I go and
Hassan,
speak
I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, please, Yusuf, go ahead.
So exactly what you're saying. When you're sitting with the IT team, you're telling them the vulnerabilities and what you found. It's impressive for them, but for the management, as you mentioned, they don't understand. What they understand is cost. How much is it going to cost them if it was abused? How much is it going to cost them, whether it's in actually financial losses or reputational damage? This is what the management understand. This is the message that you need to be delivering to them. So I gained access. I have an admin access on your entire server now. Okay, the management doesn't understand what kind of damage this inflicts. Tell them how they're going to lose access to the systems. Their customers will not be able to make transactions. They're going to lose this much amount of money every hour. This is what they understand.
Perfect. So what do we call this, guys? What do we call this? Sorry, Muhammad, for interruption. What do we call this? You will present a business case and you will show them the cost-benefit analysis. You will show them the return on investment. And very important terminology here, guys, and I don't know about the audience if they know this, there is something called cost of non-compliance. So I'm investing 10,000 dinar today to run an ethical hacking campaign, to check my system weaknesses, so I can avoid the cost of non-compliance tomorrow. Avoid the problem where someone can compromise my system. So cost benefits analysis, cost of non-compliance, return on investment. We need to know all of these terminologies. We need to speak this business language when we go to the management, because in the end, whatever you are doing as a cybersecurity expert, you need to present this report to someone. It could be a compliance officer in the bank or in the organization. It could be an executive manager. It could be a senior manager. It could be a CEO, etc. They don't understand anything of what we are speaking. For them, we are aliens, as I said in the beginning. So it will give them tension and anxiety, and eventually they will snap at you and tell you, stop speaking. I have other meeting. So this is very important. Sorry for interruption, guys. Did we cover the attack and defensive part in here? Because I think we have other agenda items.
Yeah, yeah, we
Mariam,
definitely did. Yeah.
show me the agenda again.
Yeah. So the agenda again. I think Mariam will have to share her screen again.
She should share her screen.
Because see, the approach here is we are showing people an entry to this subject, to ethical hacking and to Active Directory attack. It's not necessarily that we can cover everything with Active Directory attack or defensive approach, but at least we are opening this door for them to go and read and learn. In the end, an ethical hacker, it's always self-learning. You can't learn from others. You need to go test, try different scripts, fail again, till you find the good recipe that will work for you.
Try harder.
I always thought, offensive security. I always actually thought that there's a way, but there is actually no way. You gotta construct your own way, actually.
Exactly, and it's very important to mention also when we assign someone to do this task or this activity, we should always put a disclaimer to management, and I believe most vendors also do this, that there's no way anyone can claim or promise that they can find all the weaknesses, all the vulnerabilities in your system. So it's always limited scope, limited time.
We have a limited time frame, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So yes, can you please go to the agenda, to the Mariam? Can you scroll down? I have no access to this. Who's sharing the screen? Hassan, who's sharing the screen? Is it you or Mariam?
No, not me. I think it's Mariam, but I can put up the agenda myself.
Yeah, please. Because I think now the next subject that we need to discuss today is vulnerability assessment. And what does it mean?
Let me do this, and
I have confidence that we have covered the basic objectives of the penetration testing here and Active Directory attack and defensive approach. We have given them the main important terminologies, the CIS system hardening or benchmarking, the terminology of minimum security baselines, the NTLM hashing, and how can you escalate your privileges from a normal user to a domain admin or to an administrator, take advantage of some other weaknesses in the system, try to create a lateral movement and jump from one system to the next system. So the idea here, why do I hack a system? I'll try to hack the next important system. It's not about hacking Active Directory by itself. It's about gaining a privileged access so I can access an important system, which could be a financial system, core banking system, something that can give me some benefit, or leak personal data, confidential data. If it is let's say a medical company or an oil and gas, it could be IP, intellectual property information or data about their projects, their products that will be released in the future. This information can be sold for a big amount of money in dark web or to competitors, or it could be for the sake of vandalism only, to destroy this company and impact its reputation and damage the value or the value of the shares of or assets of this company. So
I'm sorry, Hassan. I think Yusuf will be presenting vulnerability assessment and pen testing.
Yes.
For now. Yeah.
So now it's time for Yusuf. Yes.
Which is an interesting topic, actually.
Who will share the screen, Yusuf or Mariam?
I believe I'll be sharing it. Just a moment, please.
All right, perfect. Perfect. So Yusuf will take you through the basic explanation of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing and what does it mean, what's the difference between security and compliance. So Yusuf, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Sure thing. So thank you so much, guys. I believe Hassan and Mohammed did an excellent job explaining the technical part. I'll be explaining the high level of the vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So to start with, I'll be taking a couple of steps back just to re-explain some of the things that we discussed previously. VAPT stands for Vulnerability Assessment and Penetration Testing. It is an activity conducted by security professionals. It can either be internal or external professionals to identify and report security issues. So this includes misconfigurations, weaknesses, or vulnerabilities that can be abused by a malicious party. Anything that can be used against you, the whole job of the penetration tester is to identify this and report it to you. And the keyword here is to report it ethically. So these are reported to you by the end of the activity, along with the recommendations on how they can be addressed. So some of the activities conducted, as mentioned, it includes finding misconfigurations, weaknesses, or vulnerabilities that can be abused by a malicious party. Now, there are a number of reasons why you would perform this kind of activity. One of the main reasons is that depending on your line of business, for example, if you're a financial institute, you're in a banking and finance industry, some regulators will require you to perform these activities several times a year. The best example would be the Central Bank of Bahrain. They require all banks to perform at least 2 activities a year and submit the findings back to them. Another example would be the PCI, which is the payment card industry. They require quarterly scan to be performed by something called an approved scanning vendor, or an ASV. So this means that if you're trying to be compliant with the PCI, you cannot just approach any consultancy firm, any penetration testing company. You need to go to a company that has been approved by PCI to be conducting these kind of activities. So now I'll be talking about the different phases of these activities. So and I'll be discussing the difference as well between the vulnerability assessment and the penetration testing. So there are 5 main phases. It's reconnaissance, vulnerability detection, exploitation, post-exploitation, and reporting. While the VA and PT, they share similar phases, there is a significant difference, and that's in the exploitation phase. All of these activities, they start with the pre-engagement or the scope definition. This is where the scope is agreed, what is to be tested, for how long it needs to be tested, and what kind of activities can be performed on the asset. Once that is agreed, the reconnaissance phase starts. This is when the tester starts identifying all the assets within the scope of the project, whether it's groups and permissions, machines, domains, trust, anything in the Active Directory, assuming that the testing is for an Active Directory. Now, this is performed both in the vulnerability assessment and penetration testing activities. Now, the next phase is the vulnerability detection. Once everything has been identified by the attacker, the next phase is to start poking holes into them, to start identifying any issues that can be abused by a malicious party. Again, this is done by both vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. But in the next step, that's where the vulnerability assessment stops. So in the next step, it's carried on by a penetration testing team. All the things that have been identified, all the vulnerabilities that have been identified, they are exploited by the tester to try to have a proof of concept. So the pen tester will try to exploit the vulnerabilities and demonstrate how he can gain system privileges, for example. The step after that is, let's assume the penetration tester was successful in exploiting the system and he gained an initial foothold. The next phase is the post-exploitation. In this phase, the tester will attempt to dump data or perform lateral movement to see how far he can reach within the system. And then finally, the vulnerability assessment comes back in. This is where the reporting is done. In the reporting phase, the tester will formalize a report with all of the findings and submit it to the client, along with the evidences and recommendations to address these things.
That's really clear, Yusuf. I think straightforward and clear. We have all these phases as mentioned in the beginning, and now you can see them in the slide written in front of you. And we have different approaches that could be used, whether it's reconnaissance or vulnerability detection, exploitation. It's all good to know all of these phases, and it's very important for you guys to understand these terminologies when you speak with vendors, when you speak with your IT team. This will add huge value to the discussion.
Exactly. So the next phase is, the next point is, why is this important? Why should we be conducting a cyclic or periodic testing? And the keyword again here is cyclic or periodic. Let me just go to the next slide. Here we go. So this is a quote that I really like to think of when I'm thinking about security. Your organization has a vision and a mission. The vision is somewhere you want to be in 10, 15, or 20 years. So it takes 20 years to build a reputation and a few minutes of cyber incident to ruin it all. So this was said by Stefan Napo. He's the CISO of Group SEB, and it is very true. You can spend a long time, you can spend so much money building your reputation, building your network, and then suddenly in one incident, everything just crumbles down in front of you. So one of the main reasons why we should be conducting a cyclic VAPT is because on a daily basis, there are so many vulnerabilities being detected by security researchers or malicious parties. Sorry,
Yusuf, I'm sorry. Can you reshare your screen or the slides because someone cannot see the slides, basically?
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Are you all unable to see it?
It's visible for me.
For me, it's visible, but some of the audiences.
Okay, just a moment, please.
Yeah.
I think the audience can refresh the page from their side if they are facing problem also.
Okay, so how's it now?
I can see it, so please proceed.
Yeah, I can see it. Please proceed.
Sure. So there are so many vulnerabilities being detected on a daily basis. They're either being detected by security researchers or malicious parties, and you want to ensure that you're not vulnerable to these things. And the best example would be the Log4j, which was, I believe, identified in December last year. This caused panic throughout the world. Everyone was panicking. All security teams were just scrambling to identify if they're vulnerable to this or not and address it as soon as possible. And another reason is because companies, in order for them to maintain their market competitiveness, they need to be releasing products. They need to be releasing they need to be releasing products and services at a very high speed. And when you're releasing something so fast, you're often neglecting security. That's not usually your main concern.
Which is the problem we are facing nowadays with the agile development approach.
Exactly.
So there is a challenge always for now present for security experts and agile organization where you see IT team want to go live with systems very fast, but you as a security expert, you want to make sure that these systems are secure, no vulnerabilities exist within the newly programmed code. So it's always a give or take. It's like a balance. We need to find the middle ground between these two different teams, security teams and development teams, to make sure that our systems or applications are properly configured. So the best approach or the best answer for to make sure that you are in compliance is to define your secure development principles. So security should be considered in design phase before actually publishing the application. If you follow secure development principles, you can reduce the amount or the time needed to scan or to ensure compliance for these systems.
Absolutely, and I believe this is the point that usually causes friction between the IT and the InfoSec. The IT, they're trying to release services as fast as they can. The InfoSec usually tend to slow things down by trying to analyze everything, make sure everything is secure. So this is what usually causes friction between these two departments. And then the final point, which is actually my personal favorite, you're no longer trying to defend your organization from an individual user working out of his family's basement or a local coffee shop. You're actually trying to protect yourself against state-sponsored groups that have access to highly sophisticated resources. And if you notice now, there are so many countries out there that have incorporated cyber armies in their defensive and offensive operations. So you're actually trying to protect yourself from an entire nation's capabilities, not just a single user or two malicious users.
And they have all the time and all the tools required to scan your systems and find the vulnerabilities within them.
Yeah, that's the difference between a normal pen test and them. Yeah, no limitation.
Exactly, and they're sponsored. They're well funded. They're well trained. It's their daily job to come and cause trouble for security teams, basically.
So APT groups. What is the definition of APT? APT is advanced persistent threats. Those are, as you said, Yusuf, a group of security researchers or attackers, or it could be like there's employees of other nations, or it could be like organizations. Their main purpose is to find weaknesses with your infrastructure and attack you. Nowadays, it's being sold as hacker as a service or DDoS as a service, or there are other terminologies used nowadays. You can basically get an attacker on a contract. You pay him to attack someone or to hack someone for you on your behalf. So Qusay, you can write in the chat the other types that are available nowadays. This could add value to the audience and to us. Please proceed, Yusuf.
Sure. And actually, surprisingly, it's very cheap to hire these kind of malicious attackers. So it's doable, it's cheap. This is why attacks are never ending. So now we go to the security versus compliance. A common mistake that I've seen is that organizations tend to limit their security to what a regulator is asking for. Their main purpose is just to be compliant with a regulator's requirements. That's it. So regulators, for example, will require you to conduct VAPT exercises multiple times a year. However, the methodology or scope are not always listed in their requirements. So what security teams do is that this leads to improper scope definition if you completely rely on a regulator to give you what you need for your security.
I don't think you can rely on the regulator in this case because you know your environment better than anyone else. You need to know what is being published, what is being kept inside, what is exposed, what's not exposed, what security layers you have in a place, which system is behind a firewall, which system is behind a DMZ. Do you have honeypots in a place, like a test system? So it depends on you in the end to find out the best flavor of ethical hacking services that you are going to get from a security service provider.
Exactly. So what the regulator is actually going to give you is a minimum level of security that you need to deploy. You need to take that and you need to build on it, not take it as it is and be like, okay, I'm happy with this, I'm compliant. So here we can see an example of an activity of a vulnerability assessment frequency and a penetration testing frequency. If you were doing this for compliance purposes, you would be doing that twice a year. It doesn't say which one needs to be done twice a year or if either needs to be done twice a year. You can do twice for vulnerability assessment or twice for penetration testing. But if you're doing it for actual security, there isn't really a standard out there, but there are some good practices to do. So one of the good practices is that vulnerability assessment needs to be performed post moderate and significant system changes, or when a vulnerability is made public. Again, an example would be the Log4j. When that vulnerability was made public, it was a good time for security teams to perform vulnerability assessment to see if they're vulnerable to this or not. And then the frequency for the penetration testing activity can be twice a year or depending on a release of a new system, for example.
Okay, I have a question. I'm not sure who got answer to this question. Anyone could answer, even the audience in the chat. So how long it takes for a vulnerability or a bug that is found in a system or in a service or a protocol or a port, etc., to be published and to be known to the world? Who knows?
If I'm not mistaken, you have 30 days. That's what I read about. I'm not sure.
I believe from Microsoft, they have up to 90 days.
Correct, I guess.
Microsoft
I think
officially
depending on vendors, yeah.
It's so that's if the company
That's a 0
or
day,
the
basically.
attacker, if the attacker is an ethical hacker.
Yeah.
Again,
ethical.
Yeah. So what actually happens is, there is the normal reporting route, and then there is the black market, which you can buy it as a 0 day, which means it's not patched. And there is a marketplace for that. You can literally go and type in the service that you want to buy a 0 day for. And what 0 day indicates is this is not patched in the latest release of the application.
And it's not also known to the public or to.
There are a lot of bugs and
so
exploits.
The challenge here for us guys, if it's a 0 day, and we are being targeted by a persistent group or attacker, and they found a 0 day bug in our system, do you think they will announce it? I don't think so. It could be months before we know there's a vulnerability in our system.
Probably attacks are happening right now, basically.
Yes, and the thing is, you are always one step behind the attacker, because ethical hacker will use the information and knowledge and tools available to them of today, as of today. But attackers will use, as Hassan said, some information from the dark web. It could be 0 day exploits crafted to be used against you. This is the problem. When they know what you have, what service you are running, they can buy zero-day attacks and craft exploits to be used for you only, specifically on your infrastructure. And this is why it's very critical for us as a security experts, not only us, even IT people, to avoid publishing information on the social media or, for example, LinkedIn, saying, "Oh, I have successfully completed, for example, the installation of Windows Server 2016." Or installed checkpoint firewall. Basically,
Bad
you are
idea.
giving this piece of
Yeah,
information
exactly.
and on a golden plate to the attacker. He will say, "Thank you very much. Now I know you are using this brand or this technology. I will go find exploits for this brand or this technology."
That's how Recon works, basically.
Yes.
So I think there are two very relative points to this subject. There is one which is honeypots. So having things that are deployed for the purposes of misleading an attacker on your infrastructure and purposefully, my English is going away.
That's
And
happens
yeah,
sometimes.
and having those built in a certain way, which allows attackers to exploit them for you to be able to monitor and see what exactly they're trying to go after. So that's one. The second one is a little bit slipped off my mind.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
It slipped off my mind. I'll come back to it later on. I think.
So
I'm sorry
I'll actually comment on this.
Yeah, go ahead, Yusuf.
So if you remember the WannaCry vulnerability, sorry, the WannaCry ransomware, it was abusing the Eternal Blue, which was developed by the NSA. They kept this. They knew about this. They kept it for themselves. And the NSA, they're supposed to be the good guys. Well, air quotes, the good guys.
Don't
They
say that
kept
publicly.
and so yeah, they kept this for a while, and it only went public when they were actually hacked, and these zero-day vulnerabilities were released. These zero-day exploits were released. So
Again,
yeah,
to touch on
this
what
is one thing
Sai
to
said
consider.
regarding the Log4j, I don't know if you guys watched it, but there was a DEF CON in 2016 exploiting actually that Log4j. And now it's re-hit in 2021, if I recall properly. Let me send. I will share actually the DEF CON. It was I don't know who was it with, but it happened in 2016, and that exploit was just out in the wild till now. I will share it actually. I'll share it to the audience.
Sure. Just as a closing point for the security versus compliance, this is something that I've seen actually over the last year and a half. I conducted several activities, and I've had two organizations request for a clean report, something that is excluding high and critical vulnerabilities, just so they can report this to the regulator. So because their
basically
focus
check
is
the box, only checking the box, ticking
exactly because their focus is compliance only, they don't really care much about security. They just want to be headache free from the regulation.
And that's why it's always recommended to have a segregation of duty. IS or information security experts should not be part of the same team with IT, because if it is up to IT, they just want to check the box, get any vulnerability assessment report, and they will say, "We have done it. Thank you very much. Check the box. Compliance, submit this to the central bank or to the regulator." And that's why you need to have another set of eyes that is outside this whole group, like of IT or compliance, to make sure that you have proper compliance. Not only that, in some cases you need a third party, because I don't know why, but this is a fact. In some cases, third parties' opinion always prevail. It's always respected more than the actual internal team. Now, this is a fact, and I'm sure everyone who works in a large organization have faced a situation where they believe in third-party consultants' opinion more than their own staff or consultants. And in some cases, their staff are better than the consultant. So you tell me, what do you think, Hassan and Muhammad and Yusuf also?
Well, I have to agree with what you said, because again, hiring someone from outside cannot, like, because basically you guys or whoever is just want to pass the test or pass the regulation or pass whatever it is, just to release whatever out there. But someone coming from outside, you cannot just downgrade the vulnerability or give you something to pass something. I don't know, I'm saying a lot of some things, but I don't know how to put it in the words. Yeah. So
the auditor or the consultant is unbiased.
yes, you can say.
And this
yes.
is the importance of
That's
independency.
the whole point, actually.
Yeah, this is the importance of independency. So in some cases, if I want to force something on IT, I'll not do it myself, even if I know. Hassan is a ethical hacker. He want to push something on his IT team. It's not necessarily that he will do the test himself. He will go and acquire the services of NGN and ask Muhammad to run the same scripts that he know how to run anyway. But when the report comes from Muhammad al-Mufti from NGN, it will have more value. It will have stronger words compared to what will Hassan say internally. So this is how it works.
I think
They
it's
don't hate you though, Hassan. Don't worry. No one hates you.
It's
It's
definitely
just
the
an
case.
example, guys. Just an example. It's not.
It's definitely a case within the industry. When I was going to organizations with doing the consultant role, I was definitely seeing this IS IT friction all over the place, and I always thought, oh, maybe they just don't like each other. But it turns out that it does have to do a lot with what we've talking about, and I feel like if you don't have the option to go with an outsider or a third-party consultant, depending on the size of the organization that you're in, try to always structure your VAPT exercises in a way where there is a revalidation test post the report. This enables you to build a certain level of trust with IT to say, I am working with you right now so that the final report actually comes out the way that you want, but I need you to close these vulnerabilities before I conduct my revalidation test. And what this enables you to do is it gives you some leverage to build trust and mutual understanding that the objectives are the same. So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, we're
That's
not against
really,
each other at the end of the day, you know? We're working for the
yes,
same goal. So
true. That's really good. So, guys, that was an awesome discussion today. We have awesome topics discussed here, and the chat was on fire. And we have very good comments, questions coming in the chat. I believe added great value to the discussion. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Yusuf. Muhammad, that was great from your side as well.
thanks.
I think we have now question and answers. If you want to answer some questions from the audience.
So I think we have a question. I'm not sure for which Hassan this is. So there's a lot of Hassans. So what is the solution for this issue, Hassan? If IT asked you to change the rating from critical to low, you have to try and understand them. Why do they say that they have to reduce you have to reduce the vulnerability from critical to low? Something that Yusuf has mentioned before is controls. And we've talking about preventative, detective, compensating controls,
Yes.
preventative, detective, and my memory is disappearing today. But essentially, you have these categories of controls in place within your infrastructure, and you have to understand that because your controls are layered in an onion shape, and I'm pretty sure that you've heard this comparison before for security. It's always in an onion, and the more layers you have, the less risk that there is to a certain vulnerability. So a certain vulnerability might be critical or a 10 on a CVSS scale. But because you have certain compensating controls in place within your infrastructure, your risk exposure to it might not be as high. So it's very important to understand why IT wants you to reduce the rating, validate what they're saying, and seeing if there's some level of consensus. You obviously don't have to change it because they've asked you to. You have to validate your understanding. You have to always take their perspective into consideration when you're evaluating these risk exposures that you're putting on paper.
See, another answer to your question, Shah. In some situations, some scenarios, and I'm saying some scenarios only, it could be a false positive. So if it is the case, they need to prove me wrong as a consultant why this is a false positive. Okay? So this is another answer to you. But as Hassan said, there could be a compensating control in place that will prevent this exploit from being used or utilized by the attacker. Okay, another question.
So this is actually a question that I had to deal with a lot.
I think I answered already in the chat for this question. First of all, depends on the organization structure. Secondly, the new rule book that was published in July, they are clearly now requesting financial institution and banks to have a segregated security team, to have a CISO, security unit head, or security manager. It depends on the organization structure and the titles used by that organization, and to conduct these tests utilizing third-party services. The report itself will be sent to CBB by the compliance team. So I don't speak directly with CBB. I send my reports to compliance, and compliance, in turn, they will go and speak with CBB.
This question here is kind of general or generic,
Exactly.
because depending on what you're dealing with. But for instance, if you're dealing with a Windows 7 or whatever, most of them, or if some services aren't disabled, Eternal Blue is the way in. But again, it's a very generic question because you have a lot of stuff to deal with, like coming from web, Windows, Linux, mobile apps, Unix systems, VSDs. So it depends on what you're dealing with.
So to keep it simple, if this is a Windows server and it's just installed by a normal IT guy, who a support engineer, I'll not say a proper system administrator who have MCSE or MCTP or whatever certification from Microsoft or Linux, Red Hat certified like that. So those guys usually install the server and keep all the basic services running or default services running. And with services running, you could have something like SMB version 1 that could cause ransomware. You could have Telnet running, or could have some other services running.
Or like Hassan said, you can just grab the responder
Yes.
if it's by default, basically.
So as I said, you should always follow the benchmarking or system hardening steps, minimum security baseline. You can refer to CIS best practices, Department of Defense best practices. You have many other frameworks that you can utilize. Maybe you can use some controls from cybersecurity frameworks like NIST or ISO, or each framework have its own approach. But in the end, the approach that you are going to take, it's almost similar. You need to find out what assets you are running in the organization. You need to follow a risk-based approach to your towards your assets when you do the risk assessment. Once you know all the risks associated with your asset, you need to define the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What is being used? Why this asset is being used for? What services running on this asset or this server? What type of data I'm storing on this server? All of these answers will change the way you will treat vulnerabilities and the way you will treat the risk. Especially if you are running a financial system that for example, hosts a core banking database with a potential impact of millions of dollars in loss. This is a different story compared to a system used only in UAT environment to host dummy data. So
yeah, exactly. Against a generic.
It's a give or take. There is no one approach. It depends on your organization, depend on your infrastructure. Compensating control, it should be proven, Shah. I can't just say I have a compensating control. What if I have a firewall and the firewall itself is how can I say, weak or vulnerable? Then what did I do? I have a bypass. What Qusay said, WAF is an illusion. People come and throw a WAF and they say, oh, we are secured. No one can bypass it.
Most WAFs are bypassed, just to make it clear.
This is the thing. So compensating control, as we said, you can check the box and you say, I have WAF, I have PAM, I have identity access management, I don't know what, I have authentication, but you leave your NTLM hash, or like, for example, weak or vulnerable. For example, you don't have segregation, network segregation. Anyone can run a tool to dump your hash database or whatever, if you are using caching, and go and decrypt the hash online and get all the passwords. Correct, Hassan?
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to add regarding the WAF is that it was recently it was a requirement of CBB that companies should have WAF and DDoS prevention services. So when you have these kind of requirements, like you mentioned, Hassan, someone would come and just deploy WAF and that's it, they'd be happy with it. But in security, it's a cycle. You deploy a WAF, you monitor and analyze the traffic, and then you enhance it. Same thing again. You see how some requests are bypassing WAF, you analyze it, and then you enhance it again. It's not just deploy, it's not plug and play, and that's it.
It's a continuous process. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shah, there is no one answer to your question. Now, for example, CVSS, this is the commonly used one here in the by the security experts. This is the one I've seen most of the time. Compensating control, it's not up to the tester. So you need to understand that in some scenarios, the tester, it's not his job to mitigate the risk. He's finding a vulnerability, but it's not his job to go and mitigate this risk.
We just give recommendation,
Yes.
and it's up to the person who are testing, or we are testing, for them to do the remediation, basically.
So I'll tell you something. I always give this example. Imagine I have 10 grams of gold. Okay, let's say worth 200 dinar. Example. So an attacker will come and say, sorry, not an attacker, ethical hacker, if he's following the book, or auditor, I will not say ethical hacker, auditor, will come and tell me, you can't leave your gold outside like this on the table, unattended or exposed. Anyone can pick it up or take it. So compare gold to data. Data is gold, okay? The answer here, what type of data I have in the server, and does it worth to go and invest 10,000 dinar in a solution to protect a 200 dinar of data?
So, yeah, again, it depends on the enrichment of the data, or what is it, or is it that worth it, or it's not that worth it?
Wait, I didn't finish. Now, if you will ask this question like this, most of the time the answer will come no.
No.
Correct? But yeah. I would say in some cases, yes. Why? In some cases, this is truly happening now, especially in banking. You will invest 10,000 dinar to protect 200 BD worth of data, and the reason is non-compliance, the cost of non-compliance, the damage that could happen to your brand, reputational damage. So this is also a risk. So you always assess the risk from the bigger picture. You look at the big picture. As I said, guys, we are no longer technical guys. We are no longer technical guys. A CISO is more than 50-60% business. He speaks business, or she speaks business. It doesn't have to be a man. So you are not expected to think of technology and tools and protocols. No, you need to think of the big picture. What will happen if this asset stolen, if this data leaked? What will happen? You need to assess. You need to have a proper testing scenarios, tabletop scenarios, and actual scenarios. It depends on the organization type, industry, and based on the assessment results, you need to put proper controls in place. I believe this is cover your answer, Shah, in general. And I'll tell you one last comment before we conclude our session for today. In some cases, you'll have your hand tied. You can't do anything as a security expert, or as an IT engineer, or as an ethical hacker. Nothing more than recommendation you can give. You need to take risk acceptance from top management. They need to sign on the risk. You need to communicate this risk clearly with the potential impact and likelihood to your top management. Take their sign off on it. It could be a cybersecurity steering committee. It could be a board meeting. It could be anything. CEO sign on this risk. Once you do that, you have cleared your side in this situation. Thank you very much, guys. I believe that's it for today.
It was an honor meeting the audience and talking to them. It was an honor meeting Yusuf, Hassan, the other Hassan, of course. I already know you, Hassan. So yeah, I mean, it was a fun session. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. So we are sharp on time, 2 hours. It's 1:05. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, Muhammad. Your knowledge added value here. Qusay, you have been a great help to us. I wish we have you in the future. Ilya, this is for you. Please keep Qusay in your radar. Try to get him. He's a busy man, but try to get him.
For sure, for sure. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, gentlemen, for very interesting and interactive session.
All the best to you guys. All the best to the people trying to enter this field of ethical hacking and security. It's the future.
Have a good day.
Sure.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.